was back at the National Fire Academy. So a little bit my bad. I didn't print this all off and get it organized as much as I'd like to. So we'll kind of go through the slides, and I may be missing some like hard data backup points or quotes or things like that, just because of the way the presentation goes. But at any point, please jump in with questions. I think it'd be better to have this be more of a discussion than a presentation. But as we go, it's going to kind of build a little bit, but yeah, certainly jump in. I may be a little sloppy with the changes from the presentation to a video or to notes or something like that. So we'll try to keep it broken up and maybe even take breaks at, about a half an hour to see if there's anything anybody wants to talk about. So if you guys are all good, we'll just go straight to it. All right, so, okay, you guys seeing the slides now? All right. So, again, the whole point of this was, I enjoy survival, firefighter survival. It's some of the best training that we do because it kind of tests you. But going into the EFO program, they try to have us pick a topic that we really want to explore. And, I kind of felt like firefighter survival was just kind of addressing the low-hanging fruit type stuff, the skills, the drills, the techniques, and even just the tools. I mean, our department spent, I don't know how much time and effort exploring which bailout kit we were going to go with, but, that seems to be like a technical solution to a really dynamic problem. And just felt like maybe somebody needed to get into that a little bit deeper. So let me see how I change slides here. We'll skip my intro. That's not really so much important. So what I'm really talking about is just this, and this quote pretty much sums it up. It's from a real famous British general from the World War I, World War II era. And he talks about how the study of war should concentrate on the actualities of it, and like the principles of it, the strategy, the tactics. That's the easy stuff. And if you really think about it, it is the easy stuff. It's the we could talk about, we could tabletop, we can do all kinds of discussion about strategies and tactics, and it's fun. But what the fire service is really missing is the individual level stuff, and where how stress affects firefighters, how fatigue affects firefighters, and we kind of have this all-encompassing view of firefighters that we're all the same, we're all the same skill level, we're all the same mentality, we're all the same commitment level, and it's just not true. And I think that's really kind of what I wanted to get into is how do we let people know more about how those things affect them in their work, and not just what tools or things they're going to use in those types of situations. And really, it kind of sums it up, that last one, as far as focusing on the actualities of war. It's true. I mean, the view of the fire service on firefighter survival is completely technical. It's not personal or individual. And, it kind of stuck home with me. It's like, the greatest barrier here is really commitment. If I believe that a bailout kit or some RIT drills or a team coming to save me is the solution to me being trapped, I honestly think that, you guys getting that back echo? We're good. I honestly think that that's a total gamble. And I don't want to put, don't put yourself in a situation where you're dependent on others to save you. I mean, it's kind of that approach. And I believe that too much of the fire service is kind of in that mindset. This bailout kit will save me, or this RIT team will save me. The fact of the matter is that, survivability is your responsibility, and nothing other than your commitment to it is going to make a difference. So you have to take on the little extra to make sure that you're going home to your family. And I know that it's kind of limited to a smaller group that has that view of the fire service. Fortunately, we're in that group today. I mean, you guys are taking the time out of your day to get involved here and discuss this, but it's kind of funny how it is outside of the fire service. And you start to dig into survival, with the military, you dig into survival with a lot of different areas, and they get to choose a lot of who they work with. You know, this story from Greg Long, he's a big wave surfer, you know, one of the most talented big wave surfers out there. And a little bit of background on big wave surfers, you know, the efforts that they go through to prepare themselves is just absolutely incredible. And because they know the realities of what they do. For example, big wave surfers go through, you know, constant training on how to hold their breath, and breath holds are critical to them. And some of these big wave surfers can have a static breath hold of up to 6 minutes, you know, some even excess of 6 minutes of just sitting there in a completely relaxed state to hold their breath for 6 minutes. But they know that under working conditions, that's only going to yield them about a minute of a breath hold. So Greg Long was out surfing at Jaws, I believe, or I can't remember. I think it was Jaws off of Southern California, or the Cordell Banks. And he got held down for a few waves, pinned down to the point that he went unconscious. And there's very few people in this world that have ever been pushed to the point of holding their breath to going unconscious. I mean, the human's desire to breathe is probably the greatest force that they can have. And here he was pinned underneath the water, but because of his training and preparation, you know, you can see right there, he didn't allow himself to lose confidence that he was going to survive the incident. He had a no quit attitude. He knew that to breathe water was guaranteed death, but to hold his breath as long as he possibly could would be the potential at life. And he made it. You know, it's they say that drowning is by definition is dying. You know, so he survived a near drowning incident, was resuscitated, brought back to life. But what's interesting is, you know, here he says, you know, because of the elements of risk in what he does, he insists on working with individuals that share his focus on training and preparation. And I mean, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could handpick the people that we're working with on a day-to-day basis? And it's, you know, it's just not true in that sense. But at the same time, you know, just because people around you in your department or in your station may not share that level of commitment, you can't be broken. You have to find these other people who are committed to the job and training and preparation, and find that motivation. Because if you let them break you, if you let the critics or the people who are busting you up about working out or about training or anything like that get in the way, then you're letting them win, and you're putting your survivability into their hands. And that passive approach is just not acceptable. You know, I think it starts with really truly accepting the fact that what we do is dangerous, and it builds a sense of complacency in that we can go a long time without fires, or we can do things right. I mean, the key here is that in the fire service, I think we get lucky way more than we are good. And one of the papers that I found so interesting when I started doing this one was one written by Cynthia Renaud, and it was called The Missing Pieces of NIMS. And she essentially just slammed the NIMS process in incident command in the sense that all it really is a management tool, you know, an emergency management tool. It doesn't help the first responders arriving to incidents, and it doesn't prepare them for what they're actually going to face, be it a structure fire or an active shooter or a Hurricane Katrina. And she says, you know, really what we need to accept is that incidents don't all go the same, that they are truly chaotic. And it's that space where things are truly unknown. And Aaron Fields, a lot of people say, you know, the fires are more similar than they are different. And that's absolutely true. But still, the fact of the matter remains that they're very dynamic. A lot of stuff can happen. And even with our best approach, our best people, our best chances, there's still that measure of uncertainty that we don't have in the fire service. It's not super black and white. Everything is changing constantly. So what we're going to cover today is kind of, you know, the things that I think is missing, the reality of the fire ground and the reality of the fire service. Talk about the individual and the approach to the individual, because I think so rarely do we actually discuss the individual, especially when it comes to the fire service. I want to cover some of the human factors that affect our performance in these survival situations, and then of course the proverbial dominoes and how they start falling and things start falling apart. In order to kind of talk about those, you know, we have to face the realities, we have to discuss our human responses, and then find ways to build resilience to those responses. And that's, through a variety of different methods. And I'm kind of excited about doing this now because it's going to give me a little bit of accountability. I just finished a 23-week fire academy, working out every day, training every day. And, in that breath of relief of it being done, I've certainly slacked off on my commitment. So today is going to be a real good, refresher for me on what's important and how to get back at it and make sure that I'm truly committed and being accountable to what I need to. So, a lot of resources I used for this book or this paper. You can find it. We'll get you the link later. It's a pretty extensive document, but really it comes down to survival. I've always been intrigued by survival stories. And, Deep Survival, one of the best books you can read, just a ton of stories about survival, how the body handles it. And then making those connections and parallels to the fire service, Patty Brown being brutally honest that you can do everything right in this job and still get killed. One of the most legendary fire officers in the history of the fire service from FDNY. And sure enough, the job took him and he was doing things right. So you have to have that approach that at any given second, we can be, just swept out of here. We can approach things as we do. We can think that every situation is just like we drilled. Everything's going just right. But, it is truly dynamic and it is just a matter of seconds. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time can cost you everything. But you don't want to totally leave it up to that. You don't want to say, well, I could go at any day, so I guess, it is what it is. There's a lot of variables that we can control, and it's identifying those as much as possible. So, as we start thinking about things, and certainly there's a lot of stuff that is people are using kind of against us that, well, we're not going to as many fires anymore. That old adage of we don't do fires anymore, kid, or we're an EMS department that runs some fires. All that is true, but the reality is that when fires happen in your area, you're the ones that are going. You may not run a fire for a year, or 2 years, or something like that, but at some point they're going to call you, and the longer that gap is between you going and you preparing is what tips the scales the other way. And that's being shown in our data. You can see a little bit of a tip down, but if you look back at it, firefighter deaths inside structures and under actual conditions, it is climbing and kind of separating in comparison to the actual number of structure fires. And that's really what's telling, is that we aren't quite as good as we used to be, or our windows of opportunity are less. There's a lot to be exposed here. Some of it, I believe, is just, purely complacency. The fewer fires we're going to, the less it's in our mind, and the more it affects our performance at those fires. It becomes almost an anxious situation rather than a trained or expected situation. And, here's the more telling statistic. As you can see that the blue line is traumatic deaths inside structures, while the cardiac death rate is going down. The death rates outside of structures from collapses or that type of stuff is going down. You can see those trends going down. The fire service is getting in better shape. We have fewer smokers. All those types of things are contributing to improving our cardiac death rate. Being smarter outside the structure on defensive fires is improving our traumatic death rates. A lot of people are going defensive earlier, that type of stuff. But as far as being committed to the interior, you can see that over the course of the time that structure fires are declining, those numbers are going up. So we are not as good on the inside as we're not addressing issues on the inside as well as we are on the outside. So the reality is too that we're training poorly in a lot of ways. We have this team approach. We go out and we train in these low impact situations. We perform RIT drills where we can see everything, we can do everything, and it's really kind of setting us up for failure through our successes. And there's I don't know if any of you guys have been through the IAFF Fireground Survival School. It's a great program. They come around the country, they build the props, they leave them in place, they train people up. But one of their biggest points is that success training is killing firefighters. in the sense that we always win. You know, we run these RID drills and people always get out. We set up the situation so that they can be successful. We're not really building adaptation into our firefighters. We're not just throwing them into a situation and having them figure it out under real life conditions. You know, just this drill right here alone, it's great that we can use an attic ladder to get a firefighter out a window, but this is very, very unrealistic in the sense that we're actually going to find a firefighter in this situation to where we can perform this task. We have to train our firefighters to do more with what they have on them, or to just be better at self-rescue. A friend of mine in the military said that the hierarchy of rescue, you know, and your probabilities of being saved is self-rescue, buddy rescue, team rescue. And, you know, fixing the problem yourself is the number one option. It's the best chance you have at success. As you move down that list, you know, the reflex time, the response, and your reliance on somebody else really start to drop off, especially for us when we're dealing with a limited air supply and a dynamic fire situation. We have to really work on our individual tools more so than these team rescue tools. Not that this is bad. All this stuff is good. Training is good, but we need to shift the focus a little bit more towards reality. And, you know, the simple fact is that if you look at a decade of data, only 8% of those fatal incidents involve more than one firefighter. And I know recently we've had some firefighter fatalities where there's multiple firefighter deaths. And I think the reason why they are more public or more in our memory is they are bigger incidents, and we do pay a little bit more attention. But overall, the firefighter fatalities are one firefighter here, one firefighter there. And I think that's a reality we need to face as the fire service. We do a lot of training. We do a lot of talk that you'll always be with somebody else. You know, even back to the academy, always have a partner. We need to train people to operate by themselves, perform as themselves, and be more dependent on themselves, because that's the situations where firefighters are really dying the most, is one firefighter being disoriented, separated, those types of things, being caught in a collapse or an incident. A lot of the variables we don't know for sure. Sometimes, you know, they may have had a heart attack by themselves off performing a duty or something like that, but the simple fact remains 92% of the time firefighters are dying by themselves. And maybe part of that is they have not been trained or really trusted themselves or taken a deep inventory of themselves in those situations. They are always kind of dependent on having somebody else with them. One thing that I think the fire service is also lacking is the survivor tales. You know, my department, in the past, we always covered NIOSH line of duty deaths, and they do have a lot of information in them. We can compare things, but when you lose the person involved in that situation, you lose the real story. And you know, we can look at these NIOSH reports, but I think you can all agree that most of the time we go through these, they have the same reports. You know, communication. They address the technical information. They're technical reports that address technical information, and you don't really get to hear that firsthand report of what happened, and really in the what happened, not just what did they experience, but how were they feeling, because I think that's some of the most important information. You go to fire engineering and you look up trapped in a flashover. Mark Von Oppen wrote an article with Captain Helvin about his experience of being trapped in a flashover on the second floor. And it is really, really telling, because the guy was a squared away firefighter, had been to, you know, countless firefighter survival trainings. He's had significant experience in structure fires. Long story short, they showed up to a house, opened up the front door. There was smoke on the first floor, smoke on the second floor. He kind of had this approach of, yeah, you know, I definitely think that the fire's upstairs. They went upstairs. As that first floor fire got the air that it needed, it lit off on them and trapped them on the second floor. And that's kind of where, you know, he starts to describe in his story that things just completely broke down. They lost the hose line, tried to retreat back to hose line, completely, you know, not thinking of the fact of going out a window or closing a door and isolating. He remembers, you know, recalls being up there burning and throwing his crew back down the stairwell because that's the way they came in. And you can, build all this up to, he had a lot of training on maydays and reports and ways out and all that type of stuff. But what he defaulted to was, constant performance. And, we always train on taking the hose line in through the front door, taking the hose line out through the front door. Our muscle memory is that's our way in and out. And they had a real hard time making that mental switch of this is a situation where we can't do that. Now what are we going to do? We can go to classes and talk about flow paths in a classroom and understand it and see it on the video, but until isolating ourselves, shutting doors, finding an area of refuge, those types of things become practice on the drill ground. They're really not going to be performance in the fire ground. So I think that it's really, really hardcore to read something or to speak to somebody who actually experienced an incident and have them tell you face to face, hey man, my experience failed me. And you don't hear that in the technical reports, the NIOSH line of duty death reports, because they'd almost rather put the blame onto something else other than the individual. Firefighters are heroes. They are heroes to us internally, but we have a real hard time failing or admitting our failures. But if you talk to somebody who's faced death in one of these situations, they will be very open with what parts of their experience and training has failed them, because they want to share those messages. So, not just others failing us, but our tactics. I'm going to make a change here real quick to go to a new share and just kind of talk about this incident right here. I don't know how familiar you guys are with this, but think about this situation and how, not necessarily that firefighters failed each other, but lack of understanding almost led to 3 fatalities in an overhaul stage of a fire.
February 26th, 2010. A slow-burning fire ignites in the basement of this West Jordan home. Sandy firefighters Brandon Hartman, Emma Weatherfield, and Zach Robinson are the first on the scene.
We couldn't even see smoke when we pulled into the neighborhood. It looked pretty manageable.
We went in to attack the fire and try to save the house.
We went down the basement, got a lot harder. We got to the basement. Found what looked like a small room that was on fire.
That's Brandon. You hear on the radio. In the basement, mattress in place too close to a furnace and a
And
fire.
we immediately knocked it down.
Confident the fire was out, the 3 went back up the stairs. And they called the crews outside to turn on some fans to ventilate smoke out of the house. But as soon as the fans went on, it was clear that something changed.
It just kept getting hotter. Instead of getting cooler and the smoke clearing out, it started to get hotter and hotter.
But we still felt safe.
They didn't realize, but the fire was burning secretly behind the walls and floorboards. And in an instant, fans gave the fire a big breath of fresh air.
We have fire coming out the front door.
The room they were standing in flashed over, and they were surrounded by intense heat and flames.
Went from black to indescribable black. And I remember seeing fire rolling right over the top of us.
Snakes of flames going through the smoke.
But it went from being hot to very uncomfortable hot to my shoulders are on fire, I'm burning.
So you've got seconds. It's not even a matter of minutes. You've got seconds to get out of that room.
We can see crews scrambling out front, but in back, where there is no camera, Brandon, Emma, and Zach are frantically punching out a kitchen window, trying to escape before the fire engulfs them.
Interior 1 and Interior 2 evacuate the building. Evacuate the building. We have significant changes.
Right there, he like, how late is that? Like you're trying to explain to the people to get out of the building. They're already jumping out the window. They're basically calling the mayday at their evacuation point.
Significant changes is a warning to any firefighter to get out now, and without hesitation, they dove out of a window.
We have attack 1 just bailed out the back window.
It didn't matter how far down that window was. We were going out it.
So we have 3 crew members off attack 1 out the tail.
This is the hole in the kitchen floor where the crew was standing. Brandon, Emma, and Zach got out just seconds before the floor gave way. Then it was good to get back to your family that night.
Very much. When I walked through the door the next day, I just broke down in tears because I've got a little 2-year-old at home. And to go home the next day was one of the best experiences of my life, but it also was one of the worst to know that I almost lost it all.
Brandon, Emma, and Zach are now sharing their story and the video to remind fellow firefighters just how quickly things can change in a burning house.
We were fortunate enough to recognize that change when we were able to get out. The hard thing to simulate is the emotion,
The heat and the tactics and why we did certain things and what it means when it's a flashover.
Fire investigators say the crew did nothing wrong. They operated by the book. But since this fire, the Sandy City Fire Department has changed its policy, saying they will no longer turn on fans to ventilate a house while any crews are still inside.
I don't want to get a lot into PPV and that type of stuff, but one of the things that he said was they're changing their policy, and I think that's interesting because it's true. I mean, we have a lot of firefighters sitting in classes talking about flow path and door control and the importance of all this stuff. And yet it's still our muscle memory of we have the fire knocked, we now need ventilation. Well, again, your experience failing you. I know that this happens on a lot of different fires. I know we have the fire knocked, we need ventilation. I mean, do you really know that fire is knocked? Or are you just so pumped up on adrenaline that you feel like you got the job done? I mean, the fires I've been in, when you have that fire knocked, you really don't have a good view of what's going on. You've got a very narrow vision of what's going on. It's steamed, it's dark, it's, making that quick call of the fire's knocked, we got this. It's almost like you want to just move on to the next thing. But some simple stuff that an incident commander can do, being level-headed and cool on the outside. Okay, you have the fire knocked. All right, do you have the primary search done? Are you sure it's knocked down? Since you guys just finished fire attack, I'm going to bring you out before we start ventilation. Those types of things will be little prompts that they may say, nope, nobody wants to knock a fire down and then come right out. They want to stay in there. They'll probably come back to you and say, Chief, we want to make sure we have this thing knocked before you start up the fan. But this overconfidence and this belief that, the fire's under control, let's just blow the smoke out of there. I mean, look what happened. I mean, really, honestly, that fan is what kicked up that fire. They called for the fan just like they would normally do. As this thing said, firefighters did everything by the book, and yet it almost cost 3 lives. We almost had a triple line of duty death in the overhaul stage of a fire. Slow down and realize these are very dynamic events. There's a lot going on here, and even though you've been to a lot of single-story, single-family residential structure fires, they're not all the same. It was a matter of seconds, and they all said it. There's the things you can't describe is the emotions and the heat. In all their training, people to the position that they're going to end up being in these set situations. So let's see. So on to decision making. One of the biggest things that we've come to learn through this process is that really the brain is set up in 2 formats: this survival setup, and then or the the emotional context, and then the logical context. And it's actually inverse from what we think. Our primary decision-making process is emotional and survival because it's been around for so long. It's so deeply ingrained in us to make emotional decisions and make survival, self-preservation decisions. The secondary thought process is our logic and reason, because we really haven't been logic and reason type beings for very long in the whole course of the evolutionary chain. So while we train, talk, and think and function all day long with logic and reason, when the shit hits the fan, you fall back to self-preservation, emotional responses, fight, flight, freeze, that type of stuff. So it's really, really interesting in the sense that our body's mechanisms and our body's primary decision-making process is emotional and self-preservation driven, and it absolutely kicks off the secondary thought process of logic and reason. However, our day-to-day approach is the reverse. So we're giving great attention to logic and reason, but we're not training people in their true primary decision-making process. That cognitive thought process is based in logic and reason. And, here's that type of failure. Like I said, we sit in a classroom. You guys are sitting down right now. You're taking in this class in an objective format, eye open. There's no environmental stress on us. There's no internal stress on us. No nothing. We're able to absorb all this information into that part of our brain, the logic and reason part of that brain. But none of this is being transmitted to our emotional side or our self-survival side. That takes that constant repetition and practice to cross over that barrier. Most of the things we do in the fire service, just because of the training settings, are in this field. But to be honest with you, it's a very slow process of decision making. It's like we contemplate things. We don't just act. Emotional decision making, self-survival decision making, it is just pure action. Whereas logic and reason, this part of us, this is where we step back and go, well, I think I should do this, or I'd like to do that, or my plan is this. That is really slow. In comparison, it still can happen fast, under certain situations, but when it comes down to a survival setting, it's real tough to go through a plan and reason things out. It's the backseat driver. The reality is our primary decision making is the first. It's the fastest decision making process. I mean, how many times have you felt that I want to do this, but you put the brakes on yourself through your logic and reason? I want to jump up and do something right now, but I know it's better to do this. Well, in these situations, that but is taken away. You're either going to fight, you're going to take off, or you're going to freeze up. And these are the areas that really get clearly defined when we start looking at information in the other worlds. When we start to look at survival in the military setting, we start to look at survival in the police and law enforcement setting. This is the stuff that's really addressed and analyzed. In the fire service, we haven't quite seen the psychological evaluation of people as to how they perform, because again, we're addressing incidents technically and very ununiformly. I mean, NIOSH reports only happen if the firefighters die. Some states have OSHA reports for near misses, others don't. We don't have a national database for near misses. That's not voluntary. So really, we're poor at collecting the data of how people are responding psychologically. But you don't have to look far. This is my buddy Tyler Gelati. He works in Fort Collins in Colorado, and they were called to a house fire, and the fire was on the back of the house, mainly a deck fire, getting up into the attic. They asked the truck to go in and search. This middle picture, Tyler and his partner went in. As soon as they entered in, it was relatively clear. They were going to make a quick search of the house to make sure that it was clear. They worked their way back to a bedroom, through the living room, and they were just finishing up searching the kitchen. That's when they had a window failure, wind pushed in and completely changed the entire area. That bottom picture on the right, that's the window that they jumped out. Tyler and his partner jumped out that window. And talking to Tyler, he's like, man, things changed so fast. It went from real light smoke to the floor. He's like, I swear the smoke hit so hard, it was like it made a sound. He's like, if it was a cartoon, that smoke would have hit the ground and made a sound. He said everything changed instantly. He knew where a window was just because he had just seen it out the corner of his eye, and they went for it, broke out. Tyler jumped out the window. His partner got jammed up on some cabinets. He reached in, helped him out. They both made it out that window. And again, you can talk all day long about how we want to clear windows, we want to make them doorways, all that type of stuff, but you can see in that instant, they just got out what they could get out. What's really crazy is Tyler is a squared away firefighter. He's just like any of us. He has his own personal tools, takes the job very seriously. He's got a great background in history, and I mean he's one guy that if they're going to make it, it's going to be him. Well, in the hospital later on that night, guys came and saw him, and he was asking them, he's like, hey, can one of you guys go back there and get my axe? He's like, I know I left my axe inside the kitchen when we bailed out the window. And they're like, no, you didn't. And he said, well, no, I know when I jumped out that window, I left my axe. And they're like, no, Tyler, you didn't leave your axe. He's like, I remember breaking out that window with my helmet so that I could jump out. He's like, if I had my axe, I would have done it. And they said, nope, dude, you jumped out the window with your axe. And what Tyler said later was that he was under such stress and everything that his axe was in his left hand, and that hand just locked up, his non-dominant hand. He went straight with his right hand because that's what he's good with, broke up that window, jumped out, and sure enough, he did jump out the window, holding on to an axe. So that's the type of stuff that is so telling in firefighters that we don't address. I mean, we think we can use both our hands, all these tools, everything, but when the stress really gets to your body, it's amazing what you lose. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get further on into the experience. But, here's another one from Colorado. This was a neighboring department of ours. They were searching an exposure building. One building was well involved, wind-driven situation. They asked the guys to go in, search the exposure just to make sure everybody was out. As they were conducting the search, the sliding glass door failed, fire got blown into the house, and they were both, knocked down. Thankfully, they were fully bunked up and wearing air. I know a lot of people probably wouldn't. It's just that discipline. But in talking to one of the firefighters, he said that heat hit me so quickly, I knew I was burning. I just wanted to tear off my clothes. And when you think about it, that the burning is coming from the outside in. But if you've never experienced that feeling, or nobody's ever told you that, back to the big wave surfer holding his breath, he had to train his body to know that holding his breath and going unconscious was better than taking a breath of air. We feel like we're burning, our skin is burning. The natural instinct of people who are burning is to strip things off because you would think that that's what's causing the burns. But really, to remove your gear, to remove your gloves, your face piece, anything like that in a real fire situation is just going to cause more damage. And one of the firefighter who received the worst burn said he was starting to tear off his coat because he was burning when his officer threw him down the stairs and out the front door. And as soon as he got outside, he started to strip down. But he honestly says that the reason why he survived is because his partner threw him out of the building. Otherwise, he would have stripped down right there, either torn his face piece off or torn his coat off and suffered, that much more significant burns. So these are the realities. These are the things you have to hear from people who went through the situation, because this is the type of stuff that really isn't discussed in those reports. So, the big thing here is as be a survivor, we have to kind of change our mindset and approach to this. People will say that I may be taking an overarching look at this as far as making some of these parallels to the military or the law enforcement community. But again, survivability is my responsibility. If this is what helps me make it real and stay committed and understand that fire is just as dynamic as someone else wanting to kill us. We can say that fire is not a thinking enemy. It doesn't have a gun. It doesn't have a mission to kill us. But the simple fact is that doesn't make it any less dynamic. Building construction, fuel packages, winds. We just looked at three single-family dwelling fires where guys nearly lost their lives. And, that is the approach that you have to have. We have to be mission committed. We have to get in there. Our job is to get in there and perform. We can't just avoid risk. We have to face it, management, and approach it with a mindset that we want to do the best we can to improve our chances and improve the chances of those we're serving, and not just dismiss it as, somebody will be there for me, or we got this, we've done it 100 times. That 22-year captain, Helvin from Sacramento, he will tell you that was his number one mistake of walking up to that thing thinking we got this. That approach to that fire cost him more than anything, and almost ultimately his life. So do you guys want to take a break real quick? And I know it's kind of a grind to do it in this setting, so we can
I'm good up to these guys. I think they can kind of walk away and, go to the bathroom and stuff.
Okay.
Whatever you want to do, Brian. If you want to get a drink of water and go to the restroom, then we can hang out here for a minute.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop up and top off my coffee, and then I'll be right back.
Perfect. What do you guys think of this so far? Pretty decent format. I know a bunch of you guys have done this with us before. I record these, so this is all recorded. And then I will put this on YouTube later with the permission of Brian, of course. And then we'll all have access to it. We can share it with our crews. We can have open discussion later on. So that goes with all of them. I think I have 5 of them up so far, including Brian's first one, relative superiority, which actually only got half. That was our first attempt at recording. But if you guys like this format, we're going to continue to do it. It's pretty easy. Any suggestions, go ahead and chime in. So it looks like, anyways, since everybody's going to be quiet, I'll talk for a little bit. We've got departments, looks like, Mesa, Superstition, Boise, Avondale. Anybody else that I missed so far? I'm just trying to scroll through these names and see who we got, but so far we're pretty good. Usually we have Guadalupe and Sedona on here. Those guys were making a commute at this hour, getting off shift. But so far it's been pretty cool. I mean, to reach out and get these instructors that are top notch, like Brian and Andy Starnes. I'm working on a few others. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to do this and get guys involved. So I thank you guys for attending. You guys are the ones that are going to make this work. If you guys weren't on here, I don't think people would do it for us as quite as often. So thank you guys very much.
All right, man. I'll see if I can get this back up. Okay, so back to our approach to this job and in our mindset, and that last slide of making yourself hard to kill. I mean, it really is beyond the fire ground. We're talking about incidences across the board where we just need a greater sense of vigilance. And I think that's probably the best way to put it. Complacency is the foundation for failure, and vigilance is really what's going to make you more aware of your situations. This is a few years ago, talk about that Christmas Eve fire where the guy set fire to his house and then ended up shooting 2 firefighters upon their arrival. Firefighters taken hostage. I mean, you guys just experienced this down in the Phoenix area yesterday. They had, a domestic that turned into a fire, San Bernardino shooting. It is all over the place. And it's crazy because even just on the highway, people texting, everything, survivability is your responsibility. You don't know what's going to take you out at any point. And we just have to be more vigilant in our approach to everything, being more acutely aware of things. And back to that mindset of well, maybe you're taking this too far, Brian, we're just firefighters, we're not soldiers, we're not cops. Well, guess what? Everywhere that the cops are, we are. It's look at this picture right here. LA is handling the situation and all the cops are watching them. And if the cops are watching them, what aren't they watching? They're not watching the scene. They're not watching everything else that's going on. We got to be eyes and ears for each other, eyes and ears for ourselves. And I think it's time that we face the fact that we are in these situations. While we spend a lot of time in our firehouses and at the kitchen table and that type of stuff, the time that we do spend in dangerous situations is dangerous. And we need to have a different approach to it. On Combat is one of the best books that I've ever read as far as stress and how it affects you in situations. It's largely written for the law enforcement community. Another book that Lieutenant Dave Grossman did was called On Killing. It helps prepare soldiers for going to battle. On Combat is more the law enforcement approach. There's another one out there called Fire Psych that's written by Dr. Askin, and that's more on the firefighter side. It just recently came out. It's a great thing, but I mean, these are the types of textbooks that are missing from the fire service. They're being provided to the police. You know, you even look at major league pitchers. Major league pitchers have sports psychologists working with them as far as how stress is going to affect them and all that type of stuff. I don't think there's a department in this country that has a psychologist talk to officers in their officer school or firefighters in their rookie school to tell them how this job is going to impact them. And again, we can't wait on the departments to make that change. We have to go out and do it ourselves. And it's absolutely improved my approach to the game and my commitment in reading these things and having a better understanding of what's working for me and what's not. And as you start to understand stress, you'll even see it in people on the streets. So again, man, denial and activity prepare you well for the roles of victim or corpse. If you don't get on this game and be good at your game, then don't be surprised when something simple takes you out. Don't be surprised when, you know, you're in that building going, damn it, I wish I would have wore my hood. Or, you know, you don't work with pain well. Well, what happens when you dislocate your shoulder or something in a house fire? Is that going to be what kills you? Is, you know, I'm not telling people to go out and work on pain control and that type of stuff, but just simple things like you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And because these situations are going to be really uncomfortable. If most of your day is spent in a lazy boy and most of your meals are prepared by somebody else and most of your housework is done by the rookie who cleans up after you, you are in a situation where you're just enabled all day long. So we have to start finding ways to get uncomfortable in our training, in our day-to-day environment. We have to be prepared for these situations. You know, focus on being a survivor. Put yourself into situations where you have to adapt and overcome. You know, the cable boxes are great, the entanglement boxes, because it is truly about mental control, physical adaptation, staying committed, keeping your cool. Those are the types of things that are going to make you a survivor more so than learning how to rig up a Stokes basket. It's because it's on that individual level of performance. And being somebody helping them through that, you have to coach them through that. Go out there and work in your gear, conditioning in your gear. You know, people will tease you all day long, but the simple fact is, you know, survivability is your responsibility. You have to understand what it's like, what it does to your body to work out in your gear, how that changes your performance. You know, the safety culture gets a bad rap, but if you look at, you know, one of the key textbooks for firefighter safety, the Fire Department Safety Officer, second edition, the 3 keys are training, health, and attitude. You'll notice that equipment isn't in there, SOPs, and it truly talks about the individual level, that your training, your physical fitness, and your mental state are the 3 keys to making you a safer firefighter. And the reason for that is that firefighters face 3 very, very challenging stresses. We talk about that On Combat book, and it really focuses on the psychological stresses that law enforcement officers are faced with, as far as them being, you know, threatened by another person or them being in those life and death situations. The thing about cops is, and it's very hard hitting, it's eye-opening to understand how stress impacts them, but it is only psychological stress. Cops don't have a physical workload on them very often. It's mainly psychological. They do chase down suspects. Sometimes they are engaged in hand-to-hand situations, but you talk about the physical workload of a firefighter. When we're in those survival situations, we've exerted ourselves quite a bit. So fatigue plays an incredible part. Physical conditioning plays an incredible part. On top of that, environmental stresses, heat. You know, cops are not exposed to the effects of heat like we are. So firefighting is really unique in the sense that we have 3 very difficult stresses working on us. And we'll talk about those a little bit more. Psychologically, the stresses of the psychological factors are just these right here. And this is ancient stuff about the 4 poisons of the mind being fear, confusion, hesitation, and surprise. You know, think about test anxiety. People all the time have things as simple as test anxiety. And I know the answer, but I just can't come up with it. Or I want to do this, but I can't. And this is a really tough slide. But the truth of the matter is that adrenaline, that norepinephrine, that type of stuff does actually physically alter our decision-making process. And that anxiety, that stress, it shifts you from that logical state to that emotional state. And it does it through receptors in your brain. And while people say, well, I have test anxiety, it is truly a physical response. And the more emotional you get, the less logical you get. You know that in chasing women or drinking beer or anything like that. It's the same when you get to test anxiety. You start to get worried about things, you do worse, things fall apart. It truly does happen that way. Our decision-making process is compromised when we start to get stressed. The psychological components are very true. That, and you can find lots of documentation about it. But that's the very bottom level. Anxiety is also described as just diffuse fear. So when we talk about, the 4 poisons of the mind, fear, confusion, hesitation, and surprise, well, fear is anxiety. It's that diffuse feeling of concern, which leads to the confusion and going, well, I don't really know what to do. And in that not knowing what to do, you hesitate. And things start to slow down, you don't act in time, and then before you know it, surprise, you're in a bad situation. And that is the dominoes that fall to get you into the bad spot. And here is from that on combat as far as what the psychological effects do to your body. And this slide isn't totally clear, but if you look up on combat, you look at red zone, yellow zone, black, any types of things, physiological responses to, or psychological responses to stress, this is what you'll find. So this is a heart rate that's prompted by psychological stress, and not physical, not working out, not anything else, just purely a psychologically driven fear, stress load will cause this. And if you think about 90 beats per minute is where the fear or anxiety is actually starting to work on you, and your fine motor skills begin to deteriorate. I mean, I know this from almost everything that I've done. If I don't get it right the first time, I start to fumble, things start to compound themselves. For instance, a few days ago or about a month ago, I missed my first intubation on a patient. I got the laryngoscope out and I immediately started feeling like I was fumbling it. That decreases my odds of success getting it the next time. Fortunately, I did get it, but I could just tell by my hands, my fine motor skills started to fall apart because I was anxious about that next attempt. I knew that I was starting to get in the way of additional attempts. You look at that escalating to 120 beats per minute and you start to lose your fine motor skills. Then at 150 beats per minute, you get tunnel vision, auditory exclusion. And once you get up to that 175 beats per minute, that true life and death situation that you're facing, you're going to end up in those situations where you're just freeze up or you can't function. What is most interesting about this is some of the things that now parallel to the fire service. The number one thing on NIOS reports is always communication problems as far as leading to line of duty deaths. What's interesting is if you read the cops stuff, the on combat and those types of things, they talk about auditory exclusion, how cops are so into the moment and dealing with the survival that they tune out things. They don't hear screams, or they think that their weapon is misfiring because they're not hearing the loud bang. I always see it as communication being problems on the fireground. And how do we want to address it? Well, we talk about tactical channels, and we talked about radio positioning, and we talk about all that type of stuff. But maybe it's not a hardware issue. Maybe we're missing the fact that these guys in these Mayday situations aren't hearing what you're saying because they're so focused on surviving. And I wish I had it, but you can listen to Mayday traffic a lot. A lot of times it's Mayday, 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 here's my situation. And it's not a two-way communication. Their Maydays are just statements. They say something, I'm trapped, I'm out of air, and then they go right back to trying to survive. The incident commander is trying to get a hold of them, rescue 2 from command, where are you at? What do you need? And then they'll just come back with another communication. They are not hearing you because of a radio problem. They're under so much stress that they're making their call for help. And as soon as they stop making that call for help, they're back focused intensely on trying to survive. and that auditory exclusion has gone away. Think about it, the situations of hypothermia or any of those types of situations where blood gets shunted to the core of the body. That's a survival situation. Your ears, your hands, all those types of things are at the extremities of your body. In a survival situation, everything's getting to your core of your body. That's why you lose those fine motor skills. That's why you lose that hearing. It's your body's response to the situation. They evaluated like 160 officers that were involved in deadly force encounters where they were either attempted to be stabbed or shot or that type of stuff. And these were the emotional effects that the police officers reported. 85% of them reported that they couldn't hear what was going on. They didn't hear radio traffic. They didn't hear screams. They didn't hear their weapons. 80% of them reported tunnel vision, that they were so focused on one thing that they didn't see what was going on. A lot of that tunnel vision was the weapon. They saw the weapon drawn, and all of a sudden that was all they saw. They focused on that weapon and that threat. They didn't see what was going on around them at all. 74% reported an automatic pilot feeling. I mean, that's, again, what we're talking about, just defaulting to responses, not having control of your body. It was almost like they almost all describe it as being like they wanted to do something, but they had no control over it. And that's just your body taking over, that emotional component taking over. Slow motion time. These are the things that again, in the police officer world, if there's a shooting, an officer involved shooting, think of how much more thoroughly that situation is evaluated versus a firefighter who gets in a near miss situation. I mean, these things are vetted thoroughly. They speak to psychologists. They get data collected. This is a place where we get a much greater base of information as far as how people are performing under stress than we are in the fire service. But when you look at the police, they're dealing with all these things in a uniform and a bulletproof vest. We are dealing with all these things while we're on an SCBA, which has restricted our breathing, which already makes you more anxious. You're taking away your visibility because of the blurred situation, the smoke, the steam, not knowing the layout of a structure, or even it just being nighttime. You have your loss of touch, like all of our senses, every single sense that a firefighter navigates the world with is compromised in some way when we go into a structure fire. That alone throws off your body. We navigate the world 99% of the time with our eyes open. As soon as you take that away from you, you really start to struggle with what your world is. You start to dream up what your world is. You close your eyes in your own house and you walk around. You've been in that house thousands of times, but I guarantee you'll probably still run into a wall. Your sense of touch, you just don't feel things like you do. Hearing is already compromised, not to mention saws, fans, fire, all that type of stuff. So all these things affect our body subconsciously. You restrict any one of your senses that your body depends on a day-to-day basis, and you're really going to start to struggle to perform. This alone will create anxiety beyond the actual fire, beyond the actual being woken up. It starts to take the toll on you. Heat is incredible as far as how it affects a firefighter. I can tell you that, and I'm sure you all know that just even going to a fire alarm in our full gear, I take off my gear and I've already been sweating. That completely independent of an actual fire is incredible. So when you look at how heat affects the body, even we're talking about psychological stress, physical stress of exertion, and environmental stress. The environmental stress of heat is twofold. It's internal. And the fact that we're developing heat in our body, but our normal methods of releasing it are compromised. We're working out in a sweatsuit or in an oven mitt. The sweat that goes to our body, the capillaries opening up, all those traditional methods of cooling your body are compromised. It doesn't help the situation. In fact, your body is trying to release heat, so it sweats, the capillaries open, and that still doesn't cool the body. So what does it do? It sweats more and the capillaries open more. So your body starts to get into the situation where it's countering itself. It's trying to shunt blood to the core to protect itself, but at the same time, it's opening up vessels at the periphery to try to cool itself, and it gets into this competition. And in the paper, I cite a few different line of duty deaths. There was 2 line of duty deaths where they were actually able to take a core temperature, a rectal temperature on firefighters when they arrived at the ER. One of them was 107 degrees and one of them was 108.1 degrees. And I can tell you that there is no other job on this earth that I'm aware of where your body core temperature can be increased by almost 10 degrees in one working period. And that, it's just incredible. You look at firefighter rehab studies and that type of stuff, and it is amazing how quickly firefighters' core temperatures increase under a workload. And we rarely talk about how that affects people. But if you're a paramedic, you know that around 104 degrees of a core temperature, that's the breakover for heat stroke, which is kind of interesting because heat stroke is by definition where your neurological capabilities are being affected by your internal heat. At 104 degrees, heat stroke's defined as altered mental status. So, I mean, you're talking about taking somebody off a rig at 98.6 to 107, you're taking them into that heat stroke range. And now you're asking them to give a comprehensive Mayday report or to figure out how to work a bailout kit. I mean, having gloves on alone with bad vision is one thing, but to know that you're neurologically being compromised by your internal heat is a whole nother. And again, we're dancing around it. We talk about firefighter rehab. I'm sure, especially down there in your guys' area in Arizona, you talk about firefighter rehab and the importance of keeping core temperatures cool. But we're not talking about what those core temperatures are doing to our mental state in the fire. So the environmental part of it, you know, everything that's going on internally is being compounded by the external heat load and that type of stuff as well. So heat affects our body really in 2 ways, the metabolic heat and the environmental heat. Fatigue is something that is really tough because, again, this gets down to the individual level. And, you know, a lot of the survival stuff talks about how survival is subjective. It's one person's interpretation. What may be a survival situation for me is completely different than somebody else. And, you know, fatigue is one of those. And Lawrence Gonzalez, you know, he studies it extensively in the book as far as when it hits people. And you know, we all talk about being worn out or being beat down, but fatigue is really that wall, that peripheral wall where you say, I hit the wall. It's like there's no way to describe it, but it's just when you hit that point of not being able to go any further, you just, you know, he calls it a spiritual collapse, and it really is that. You know, you can be in great shape, but for some reason your efforts just start to fail and you start to give up. And there's no way of telling where that point's going to be. It's dependent on hydration, fitness, situation. So, you know, one thing we probably don't do well enough in the fire service is, you know, we put people to great places in the fire academy, but once they get on shift, once they get into comfort, all this type of stuff, we rarely push people beyond what they perceive they can do. It almost only happens when you take on external trainings like a smoke divers, or you go to a fireground survival course, or they really try to get that extra out of you. Too much of our traditional fire service training is just taking people to a standard or to a expectation and just calling it good. But we have to figure out a way to start working through fatigue and understanding that we can get a little bit more of that level of commitment just a little bit higher. So we kind of outlined, you know, the variety of stresses and talked about the reality. So, you know, how does this is probably the simplest way to describe how those dominoes start falling, and just to kind of take you through a traditional alarm. So really what happens is, and this is from one of the books about stress and how you work for it, but stress is that disruptive change. You know, for us, it's going to be the tone dropping. You're asleep or you're in your normal life, and all of a sudden the tone drops. And what's funny here is, like, you know, that first one is upset. And I mean, think about how many guys at the station, the tone goes off and they're like, oh, damn it. You know, I was just making coffee or just about to start a game of solitaire. It's like, well, you're automatically setting yourself up to become a victim. Like, oh, this is really putting me off. Well, no, if you expect calls, you want to go to calls, then when that thing comes in, just your mindset alone is you're already into that cope phase of, oh man, tone went off. Let's figure out how to handle this. But if you're into that, oh boy, this is really, really getting in the way of me washing my truck, then guess what? You're already setting yourself up mentally to be the victim. So, I have it kind of laid out here as far as the red is the psychological stress, the blue is the physical stress, and the green is the environmental stresses. So you're in the station, that initial alarm comes in. Because you don't know what's going on, you're just hearing the tone, you have that psychological stress spike. You get a spike of stress right off the bat of what's going on. I don't know, it's uncertainty. But physically, you're not tasked much. You're still walking out to the rig or you're getting out of bed. You have a very low physical stress load on your body at that time. You're still in your normal uniform, so your environmental stress is low. So at the sound of the alarm, the psychological stress is really what you're handling. Once you start to go en route, the psychological stress drops initially because you're going to hear the dispatch. You're going to start to get more information. You kind of like, okay, we're going on a call. We're going on a fire. Sounds good. But this is where your physical stress starts to build. You're getting dressed. It's relatively flat, but you automatically start that heat retention. As soon as you put on your gear and your coat, you're starting to build that heat retention, especially when you put on your helmet, because we all know that the head is where most heat is released. Once you get on scene, your psychological stress is spiking, and it's true whether you're the officer or the firefighter, because you're starting to get more information. You're about to go to work. You're hearing sirens. You're hearing reports. You are back into that state of, okay, I have to go to work. And, honestly, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years have been trained us, emotionally to avoid fire, and we're about to go into one. Physically, we're starting our work cycle, and again, that environmental stress is just continuing to build with that heat. Once we start stretching the line, we just kind of shut off the brain. We're going to task-oriented stuff. If you're an officer, you're doing your 360, so that may provide you some anxiety, but on the firefighter level, we just become muscle memory. I don't put a whole lot of thought into, psychological stress into throwing a ladder or pulling a line. But if your firefighters aren't sharp with their skills, you are going to see, that stress, anxiety in that range. If you got a firefighter who's not comfortable throwing ladders and you ask them to throw a ladder, you guarantee their psychological stress is going to go up, because they're walking to the ladder rack going, oh, it's been a long time since I did this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. And that starts to deteriorate their decision-making process, starts to deteriorate their awareness of the scene. In your physical actions that stress is starting to climb, and this is really where your heat and everything starts to build up in your gear. Once you get to the door, it's really that tipping point. Your psychological stress is going to be the highest when you're entering the structure, because you don't know what's going on inside there. You don't have an idea of the layout. Unlike the burn buildings, we haven't been inside all these houses. Your physical work goes way, way up, because you go from that muscle memory of stretching across an empty front yard to a front door to now I have to work around objects. I have to go upstairs. The muscle memory transitions into work. The physical load is really starting to work hard. Your body's in situations that it is not normally used to. And as soon as we get inside the house, we transition from just the internal heat effects to now the external heat effects of that structure fire. And once you're inside, you're now, on that razor thin line. You've worked yourself up physically. You're tapped. You're getting to that point of fatigue where you're really kind of giving it all your effort, because you're hoping it's going to be over soon. You're making that top floor stretch or that push to the back. Your workload is absolutely amplified because you can't see, because you can't feel things, because you can't hear things. Your psychological stress, be it consciously or subconsciously, is going way up. And now you're having those exponential heat effects of that external heat working on your gear and the internal heat of your physical exertion. And really, we're talking about a razor thin margin of error here. Getting off a hose line, getting confused, or pushing yourself just past that point of fatigue where you feel like you got nothing left and you can't make it out, or one thing changing outside of your norm, and you're going to collapse. And really, this is kind of how it's laid out, like how I like to present it as far as that alarm, arrival, at the door, and inside, how the three stresses come together. The red being the psychological, the blue being the physical, and the green being the environmental. You can see that at the door, things really start taking off, and they go up from there. And I would bet that if you put people on remote EKG, this is exactly what you'd see with their heart rate. If you put people on a remote core temperature, this is exactly what you'd see with their core temperature. If you put them under any type of thing where you're evaluating workload, this is pretty much exactly what you'd see. And the direct correlation is the more stress that's put on our body, the less able we are to make good decisions. So look at everything going up, our decision-making process, and everything is going down at the same time. So what's the point? Make yourself a survival. Be aware of all these stresses and try to build resilience in any way you can to those types of stresses. Because being blind to it or accepting it, first step in death is acceptance. The first step in survival is total commitment. So find ways to address those stresses. And mental toughness is number one. Being prepared to fight fire, expecting to go to work, being committed to your job, finding mission in what you do. When nothing is more valuable than having value in what you do. And Bob and I put it great. Mental toughness is 4 to 1. We hear all the time about stories of people coming up with great strength to lift cars off of people or help people in need, and that comes from that mental toughness of I can do this. Maybe not their physical ability, but seeing through. Believe in yourself. We talk to firefighters the complete opposite of how we talk to our children. My kids tell me they want to be pro baseball players. I tell them they can do anything. My kids want to be firemen. You can tell them you can do anything. But then as soon as we get to the firehouse, we talk down to people, or we aren't courteous to each other. We start to break each other's awareness, and it's you have to believe that you can do great things. And it comes down to, self-confidence. There's a lot of self-help books out there, but really they are great tools to improve you on an individual level. And it seems silly, but you really have to have a better self-awareness, because survival starts with you. That's self-rescue, buddy rescue, team rescue. You have to have positive self-esteem. You have to have that confidence, and you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, because if you're not constantly evaluating those things, they compound the other way. People with poor confidence don't believe what they can do. They have bad self-esteem. They don't get in the gym. Everything works down as much as it does up. You start working out, you feel better about yourself. You have a better self-image. You're more confident in your abilities. You know that you can do greater things. The tide feeds down as much as it does feed up. So get inside yourself and start there. And that's what I think is what's so bad with the fire service. We would rather talk about bailout kits and ways to get out windows, down ladders, than actually giving people the tools to make themselves better in those situations so they can actually perform those tasks. This book, it kind of lays you out into what type of person you are. You take a personality profile, and we can all joke about how bad they are, but this will make you a better firefighter. I mean, you look at like me, I was classified as a fighter, that I would fight, I'd never give up, that type of stuff, which is good in a survival situation. But what does that cost me? That costs me in calling for help early. I have to be aware that I'm a fighter. I'm going to try to get this done as much as I can by myself. But the bad side to that is that I may fight past the point where I missed my opportunity to call for help. Or the believer, believers are great. They believe that they will be successful, or that somebody's coming to get them, but they're the same ones who may call for it early and then do the stuff that they tell you, as far as call a mayday and then lay in the corner and turn on your flashlight. I believe people are going to come for me. Well, you can die predictable, or you can try not to die. So you have to figure out what type of person you are and how you can kind of improve your successes with that. So, back to the vigilance, and Von Oppen says it great, that complacency is the foundation for disaster. Start to have a greater sense of vigilance. Police officers, they no longer call things routine traffic stops. They don't say this is a routine traffic stop, because what does that do? It creates that mindset of this is no big deal. And then they have to change their terminology a little bit. The wildland setting does it great. They have morning briefings that outline all the safety, everything like that. It puts a greater sense of vigilance. We just show up to the morning, have coffee, throw our gear on the rig. Like, we almost feel like we're just going about business every day long. we need to have a little bit better, transition and expectation of what we're going to do, and respect the potential that we may be encountered. Tactical terminology is huge. I mean, like I said, the cops call them, we're going to execute a high risk warrant. That puts them in the mindset that what they're about to perform is high risk. It's a complete opposite of, hey, we're going to a bread and butter fire. We can't expect success. It sets the table for failure. One of the best tools as far as controlling stress is tactical breathing. It's something that the police officers use well. It's something that, even women going through Lamaze and dealing with babies and stuff, it's a great tool of just getting your breathing under control can help you tremendously. There's only two parts of the body that we can control in high stress situations, and that's our two parts of the autonomic nervous system that we can control. The functions that go on without our ability to think are blinking and breathing. If you don't think about it at all, you're still going to breathe because your body needs oxygen, and you're still going to blink. Your eyes need to stay watered. But if you think about it, you can control your eyes and you can control your breathing. But controlling our eyes, if we close our eyes, the problem's not going away. But if we can control our breathing, we can start to take control of our stress. And I know you will see it. I mean, after workouts and stuff, if you focus on breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, you'll start to get yourself back to a ready state a whole lot quicker. If you can hold your breath, even better. But in that initial workload, just in through the nose and out through the mouth, just taking a conscious effort to control your breathing rather than letting it run away from you will start to get your stress under control. This is the places where we want to do it. As soon as that alarm comes in, just start to get yourself to go in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth. If you exercise this as much as possible, this is something that your body will start to recognize as muscle memory. We do it at points of high stress. We always do our in through the nose, out through the mouth at high stress, and it will get us back under control. It creates that muscle memory of that's going to be our response to stress. In the fire service, years ago, there was talk about skip breathing. I think we've all kind of gone through skip breathing exercises, which are good, but really that's an air conservation exercise. It is not a stress control exercise. And when you start to do skip breathing, what you're doing is holding your breath, which makes you more anxious, and it just compounds those effects of stress. So I think you'll start to see skip breathing transitioning out and tactical breathing more coming into the fold. Get out there and work. And really there's a difference between being physically fit and being conditioned. And physical conditioning is important. It's working in your gear under actual fireground situations, because just running on the treadmill or just lifting weights is not the same as a fireground capacity. And physical conditioning is truly different than strength or fitness. And you talk about conditioning camps and that type of stuff, the NFL players who are going through strength and conditioning, the conditioning is pushing sleds and dragging things and doing exercises that simulate their actual workload, because it's going to increase our endurance. It's going to make us more flexible, increase our tolerance to pain because we're working through challenging situations. It makes us clear under stress, and it provides a more stable, positive mood. Conditioning is critically important. It basically replicates the situations that we're going to be in. It makes us comfortable being uncomfortable, and it's going to get us in a place where we perform better in the real world. Rewrite the script. Get out there and don't just train, but break your training down into training is our skills, education is our understanding, and development is bringing our training and our skill and our education together to create experience. We have to understand this. We have to know what's muscle memory. We have to know what we're just learning logically and reason, and we have to understand what is actually being done through muscle memory, because we have to perform under stress. Some things that we can do, I can do excellent in the classroom with a little bit of stress applied. Reading a book, studying for a promotional exam, I can know the stuff inside and out. But as soon as I sit down to take a test and I have that anxiety of knowing I have to perform, I may fail. So we have to get people out there and really break down what it's all about. And through your training, know that effective is just the basic. Trying to be efficient is going to start to build that adaptation and working around things. but really we want to seek to master our craft, and we probably never will, but just being effective at our job. A firefighter one skill set is truly only being effective at the job, and it will not save you in the real world. Efficiency, mastery, comfort is the keys to being successful. So you just can't learn enough about a job that can kill you. And this is speaking to the choir here with you guys, but even getting outside of the fire service, like I said, getting into a lot of different texts about stress, about performance, finding parallels in the sports world, in the law enforcement world, in the combat world, anything that you can to bring back to our job is critically important, because the fire service just doesn't have enough resources at its disposal. We can find a lot about nozzles and hose, but as far as the individual level, it takes getting into silly things like self-help books, because remember, we are a group of individuals. We're not just one big band of like-minded and equally competent and skilled people. So here's, some of the resources that I recommend. I can leave this slide up, or I can come back to it when we're over, but you can find my paper under the USFA EFO paper. It's about 75 positions or pages long. Deep Survival is a great one. It's a great book that reads really fast and kind of lights the fuse to your interest in getting into the fire service and survival like that. Even just short things. You've got a short attention span. Hit up Trap by Flashover and Fire Engineering, or the Texas Mayday is a really good one. And then the more detailed stuff, the Brain on Meltdown, it talks about how stresses really do get in the way of your decision-making process. So get out there and get the training and education together. Create mismatches. Don't guarantee success all the time. If we guarantee success all the time for our firefighters, then that's what they expect. And when things start to fall apart, they don't handle failure well. So I'm not encouraging failure training specifically, but we just have to really get people to be flexible, adaptive, and intuitive, and not just go out there and say, well, I did A, B, and C. How come D didn't happen? Because the real world's not like that. And get out and do it. You, again, speaking to the choir, but if we wait for experience, we're wasting experience, and we are actually putting ourselves at greater risk, thinking that someday we'll figure it out, or the fact that we have all the tools we need. Remember, the first step in dying is acceptance. If I accept that everything's been given to me and handed to me, and then I'm bound to fail. But survival is all about commitment and digging into it deeper. So there's my email. If you're at FDIC, meet me up. You can find me in the fire engine training community, or, I joke all the time that I used to think Facebook was for 16-year-old girls, but I found that it's the best way to stay connected with firefighters and have good discussion. It's a really, really simple way to have messages and refer to other documents. So, I know it's kind of a goofy thing to do stuff in this setting, but I'm happy to give any questions or talk about material. The tough part in this delivery is I really like to reference a lot of things and quotes and books and other articles and stuff, but it's better to just deliver the information and then kind of follow up with you guys to direct you to other sources as we go. Chris, do you have me up on video or no?
No, not right now. I have Jeremiah Sullivan up on video, it looks like.
Okay.
Yeah, Brian, I think some of our departments are taking some steps. We evaluate people for resiliency now in the academy and put them through several stress tests, have them document with their families and stuff like that. Also, you guys can check out Brian's stuff at firebytrade.com too. It's cool. So he does a lot of good stuff on forcible entry, good stuff with the Halligan. I've learned a lot just from meeting this guy, so you guys should check out some of his stuff for sure. Thanks, Brian. I don't know what to say other than that. You're awesome as usual. I appreciate your time today.
No problem, man. I'm trying to get myself back on video, but I can't seem to figure it out.
Down at the bottom, it might say why your microphone will say stop video or start video.
It does say stop video.
Let's see. Yeah, because I just have a blank screen right now. I'm looking at my ugly mug. We'll see if we'll get you up there.
No, we can roll.
All right. Sounds good.
You guys?
Anybody have any questions? As usual, if it's okay with Brian, I will download this. I'll upload it to YouTube and give you guys all a link. If you shoot me an email, you can do that, or you can just get on my YouTube page. I make it public with the permission of these guys, and then we just share it. Information kept is information lost. So I try to get as much stuff as I can out to you guys, and just pay it forward. Any questions, you guys? Feel free to unmute your mics and chime in.
I got a question. Brian, this is Mike Walker with Boise Fire Department.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
So I'm in charge of our recruit academy, and the discussion about using the more primitive brain versus the logical brain. I've often wondered, how do you actually train a guy to experience that without, putting him in a life-threatening situation? We try and make our training as realistic as possible, and certainly the recruits have a lot of stress just by virtue of having to perform and keep their job, which does add an element of of that stress. And we've done other trainings where we add, we've got a blacked out, a lot of smoke. We've got the sounds of fire going. We've got as much possible external stressors as possible. But do you have any good ideas on how do you get a guy into that mode where he is in more of the survival brain, and so he can experience and know what it feels like, and to do it, I guess, safely and ethically?
And that's probably like I think that's the biggest question everybody has. And this, like my EFO paper was identifying human factors and like kind of opening the door to discussing this. And as far as that, for lack of better terms, that like stress inoculation training is kind of what a lot of people talk about. I don't think anybody, well, won't say anybody. I think there's very few in the fire service that are formally trained in that. And you brought up like the ethical component or the safety component. And I think that's really what we don't have figured out. Fire instructor certificate is one of the worst, things for me, because it doesn't really teach you how to coach people or mentor people or develop people or anything. It just teaches you how to deliver information. And when you look at like this psychological component, you have to have a great understanding of how individuals are handling things. And you have to identify when people are hitting certain points where you are concerned about their performance and that type of stuff. And you have to coach them through that, because like you said, you could potentially create a setting where they experience that and they never want to experience it again. The military has obviously a much greater grasp of this through their experiences, like the Bud School for the SEALs or that type of stuff. They actually have clinical documentation of how to handle people in certain situations. Have smoke, have these certain situations, but we really don't know what the best way to get people to that point is. If you look at guys like Rick George, RIC Jorge, there's a few people in the fire service that have some stress inoculation programs, but I would make sure you vet them all to make sure that they really do have a good either certification or understanding of the psyche and how that's going to work for people positively and not negatively. I wish I had a better answer, but my only answer is that the more people who ask that question, hopefully there's more people out there seeking it, and in our careers we'll find somebody who's actually able to address it. I mean, maybe you try your police academy, your local police academy, Boise Police, and see what they're doing, or you try a local reserve base and ask them if they haven't a resource for it or something like that. But really within the fire service, we struggle to find an answer to that and people who can even speak to it. So I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you. I think that the biggest answer is just, like Chris was talking about, is getting people, like the thing we can provide is individual evaluations and self-awareness and trying to find out what people are afraid of. If we knowingly know that one recruit struggles with claustrophobia and one recruit struggles with fatigue and one recruit struggles with confidence, then those are the markers that we look for to help them work through these situations, rather than just looking at them all on a group level. So, kind of a roundabout answer, but I hope, I don't know, that gives you some type of answer.
That was good. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? If anybody wants that resiliency training stuff, just let me know. I'll put you in touch with the guy that does that for us. I've pretty much given out all of my pamphlets and stuff, the information that we have. It's good. It's in its infancy phases, but it's going somewhere. So we'll see how it goes. And, our department's trying to make a lot of steps in a lot of different directions, running nurse practitioner cars and behavioral health cars, and then trying to implement all this modern fire behavior stuff too. So we're super busy, but we're making baby steps. So and doing this helps a ton. So thanks again, Brian.
No problem. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me, and have a good day.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, guys. I'll post this to YouTube. I'm going to try to get to it tonight. We'll see how long it takes to download and stuff. Make sure all you guys get a link. Anything else you need from me, my phone number, my email address, and all that good stuff. Feel free to get a hold of me. What's mine is yours. So thanks again, Brian. I appreciate it, buddy. And we'll be in touch for sure.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. See you guys. I'm going to push end here. If you need anything, just give me a shot.
Bye-bye.